Hi, I'm Gary, and this is episode 241 of EV Musings, a podcast about renewables, electric vehicles, and things that are interesting to electric vehicle owners. On the show today, we'll be looking again at EVA England. This season of the podcast is sponsored by Zapmap, the go-to app for EV drivers, helping you find and pay for public charging with confidence. Welcome back to season 13 of the podcast. This will be episodes 241 to 260. And the last episode of the podcast will be, as usual, a roundtable episode broadcast sometime around the end of June 2025. So I've got lots planned for this season. I've got episodes on EV insurance. I've got an update on the EV situation in Northern Ireland. We're going to have a look at the new electric cars available if you wanted to buy. We'll be talking about charging speeds and why they're never what you think. I'll be looking at plug and charge, discussing battery swapping, and hopefully we'll spend a week with someone who doesn't have a home charger, just to see what it's really like living in that situation. And this season, we're going to have a mid-season roundtable as well as a season-ending one. So on with the episode. Our main topic of discussion today is EVA England. If you're a regular listener to this podcast, you'll know that we like EVA England here. We've had members of that organisation on several times, most recently in season 11, when CEO James Court came on to talk about education and EVA England's role in that. That's episode 216. Well, James has moved on from EVA England to help Octopus electric vehicles in their work, and EVA England have brought in a new CEO in his place.
Well, thanks very much for having me on, Gary. I'm Vicky Edmonds. I'm the new Chief Executive of EVA England, which is an independent body that represents the voice of the current electric driver and also future prospective electric drivers. I've been in the transport decarb world for nearly 10 years now, leading policies mostly in government, but also advising on electric driving policy for other organisations, and a board director of EVA England for a couple of years. So this is it's great to have the opportunity to step in and lead the organisation as it goes into its next phase.
Now, I know you used to work for or with OZEV, but what's your background? How did you get into the electric vehicle side of things?
So I think my interest in climate change came from when I was a young girl, and I actually started out as a scientist. So I was a zoologist before I became a policymaker. So I sort of went through university, PhD, and then I jumped into the civil service because I wanted to make started out doing a number of jobs in transport, but it was really trying to move myself towards transport emissions reduction through those jobs that I was really aiming at. And about 10 years ago, I was promoted to the senior civil service, and I started doing kind of Department of Transport's wider environment strategy. So looking at air quality emissions as well as greenhouse gas emissions and how transport needed to play its role in meeting our carbon budgets. And then the opportunity to become a joint head of the Office for Low Emission Vehicles, as it was then, came up. And I job shared with Natasha Robinson, who many of your listeners probably know as well, for a few years. And we were very much in the kind of early adopter phase of electrification. So we were letting 1,000 flowers bloom out in the market, seeing what the market could do itself if you nudged it in a particular direction. And it was really from that we decided that we needed to sort of force the pace of change. And that's where 2030 came from. It's where some of the big funds that are out there came from, and it's where the now ZEV mandate came from as well. So it was an exciting time to be head of OLEV. Then I stepped out and I did some kind of EV policy advice for various people, and then ended up with EVA England. And as an EV driver myself, I think this is a brilliant role for me to bring that policy experience together with my passion for driving these cars out on the roads. And we all love our cars, but it's also great to be able to start to address some of the niggles that we all have as drivers out on the network.
It's interesting, given the fact that I'm 240 episodes into here, I've never actually had anybody from OLEV or OZEV actually on to talk about the work that they do. So I might speak to you afterwards and see whether you can hook me up with somebody there so we can chat. But,
will do.
Now, you said you're not completely new to EVA England because you have been a board member. What did that actually entail?
So the board of directors, I guess as with any organisation, we would meet quarterly to support my predecessor, James, on the direction and strategy of the organisation and make sure that we were representing the membership and that we were doing the projects that drivers really felt we should be doing. My role, particular role on the board, was the policy and strategy side. So coming out of government and having that experience at how to make EV policy and how to make it work was the role that I played on the board. But the board is more diverse than that, and we have people with finance backgrounds, data backgrounds, engineering backgrounds, energy backgrounds. So the board itself is a really useful source of experience for myself and for James.
Obviously, James has been on the show several times before. He had a heavy focus on the policy side of things. He was always in discussion with Parliament and some of the MPs there. He was very active in that aspect. Now, you also have that background. Is that a focus with which you're going to continue, or are you going to try and sort of widen the scope of what it is you individually do?
I mean, I think that's still a really important part of what we do. So when I pitch EVA England to people, I say, first of all, we're independent. So we're independent of the auto sector and the big charge point companies. So we are the only organisation that independently represents the voice of the electric driver. But also, we're able to bring that voice to the centre of policy and decision making within government, but as you sort of rightly said, also wider than that within industry. So making sure that we are holding industry to account for the decisions it's making. As government's role is going to start stepping back. So they're regulators and they can seed funding, but they ultimately will be there monitoring compliance of the regulations, but the market will eventually take over. And so it's the market that we also need to be talking to and making sure that the products that they develop work for people, that people want to buy the cars that they're developing and designing, that they work properly with charge points, that the charge points are accessible to all users, including vulnerable users and users with disabilities. So I think there is perhaps a bit more of a focus towards the industry and partnering with some of the other trade bodies and making sure that we're working with them and bringing the driver's voice to the work that they're doing. So I think that's a direction I'd like to take the organisation in, whilst also maintaining that relationship with government and Parliament. So yes, we continue our meetings with members of Parliament, we continue our meetings with government. We will be responding to the government's consultation at the moment on the Zero Emission Vehicle mandate, but we're responding very much from a government's asked for some ideas on how to reduce costs of the transition. We need to make sure the cost to the drivers are taken account when it comes to that, and that this is an opportunity to perhaps tackle some of the ongoing challenges that are out there on the network for drivers. And there's also some planning work going on as well in government, which we'll be looking to get involved in.
I want to come back and talk about the Zero Emission Vehicle mandate in a few seconds. But generally, if we look at the Parliament side of it, the governance side of it, what are the policy focus areas for EVA England over the next 12 months?
Well, so having been a government, so I think their job at the moment is to keep the ZEV mandate and get it going and get it bedded in. And I think there's an awful lot of focus on that because there's been an awful lot of noise around it. So I think that's that's their role, that overarching strategic regulation that is driving the market in a particular direction and kind of providing certainty for investors and for the market. But then they also need to have the space to unpick and tackle some of the now niggles that are out there. So this is a developing and emerging sector. And the more cars that are out there, the more charge points, the more problems we're sort of encountering out on the network. Some of them have been around for a while, but some are starting to really come to the fore. So if I could sort of pick kind of the sort of top three from my head at the moment, it's the cost of charging, the charging divide between those who have driveways and those who don't. And there's been a lot of work done on that recently. And how do you narrow that cost gap? And some of the work government is doing is already helping with that. So cross-pavement solutions, but how do we get that really up and running? Are we doing enough on workplace charging? So I think that's becoming a really major issue out there. Then you've got access to charging. So the work that government's pushing forward on the PAS standard, which helps with access for disabled users, but also signage. You know, it's sometimes quite hard to find a charge point when you get there. People don't understand the numbers that they're seeing and how to operate it. They're not always in safe locations, especially if you're especially as a woman driver, kind of rocking up to a charge point late at night, very poorly lit in the back of a pub, not what you necessarily want to be doing. So I think there's an awful lot of kind of, we're sort of getting through the early adoption phase and into mass market where some of these kind of other problems now need to be addressed. And I think that's where we'll be focusing our efforts with government. And they are working on it. They are sort of tackling each of these issues, but how do we help them prioritize which ones are really still being barriers to uptake out in the market? Because if you can solve them and a driver chooses to buy these cars, then you don't necessarily need to worry about the ZEV mandate targets. Get people to buy them, reassure them that they're good things to buy and that they work. And the ZEV mandate looks after itself.
100%. Let me just loop back a little bit and talk about the price of charging, because it's a number of, I'm not going to say a number of levers, but obviously the key thing that people are going to look at first off is, can we levelize the VAT between home charging and public charging? And that will go a little bit of the way. I know I've spoken with some of the charge point operators and they've talked about a lot of the additional charges that are being levied on them by the DNOs, things like extremely high standing charges and capacity charges. And they're obviously lobbying Parliament to try and get those changed. But I think the overall question I want to ask is, we're never going to have parity between home charging and public charging. It's just not going to happen. But what do you think is an acceptable differential?
I think that's a really difficult question to answer, actually, because it very much depends on, I think, individuals' personal kind of cost of living and finances. So what's acceptable to one person is not going to be acceptable to another. I think the role has to be to try to narrow the gap as much as possible. I think ultimately it's residential charging that is the issue. So, if I'm driving on holiday and I have to stop at a 150 kilowatt charger and there's an awful lot of power going to my car at a high rate and I'm kind of en route charging, as we used to call it, I might be kind of weather the slightly higher cost because, it's a more powerful charge point, it's more convenient for me. But if I'm parking outside my house and I'm plugging in overnight and it's trickling in at kind of 7 kilowatts, that's not fair to ask me to pay the same price that you would pay kind of out as a consumer, because that's absolutely necessary for me to be able to use my car. And so I think it's, how do you help residents, I think is really the key here. And so we've talked about cross pavement. I would hope that there would be some smart technologies coming that would help where cross pavement solutions aren't viable. Is there a way to link particular charge points to your home tariff through some kind of smart system? I know we've been talking about this for years. It sort of floats around, but there must be a way with smart technology to help do that. Are there preferential rates for residents? I think really got to try to tackle the residential question and perhaps shift the focus a bit away from, it's the whole of the public network, because it's not the whole of the public network. It's about those people who need to charge their car because that's what they have to use every day and they don't have a driveway and they can't access cross pavement because that's not the way that their infrastructure and their street works. I know back in the day, and I know this has been floated again because Stonehaven did a report on this for London recently, but we did used to think about, magnetic pads, wireless charging. I mean, that's a huge cost to an authority to rip up your road infrastructure and put an entirely new kind of energy infrastructure down. But I do think it's going to be I think it's going to be an ongoing problem for a couple of years, because I'm not sure we have the technologies yet other than cross pavement to tackle it. Which is why I have in my head, are we making enough of workplace charging? So workplace charging should conceivably be done at a lower price rate. Are we pushing it enough? Is it the standard? Is it the norm for people to when they have to drive their car to work to be able to plug in? And I think that's something we need to look at a bit more closely. And I'm not sure anyone is at the moment. So within EVA England, I think that will be a bit of a focus for us.
100%. I mean, I'm very much of the opinion that AC charging as a whole, whether it's workplace charging or pavement charging, is kind of the secret sauce to getting EV adoption more widespread than it is, because the ability, your car spends 85, 90, 95% of its time stationary, and that's when it should be charging. And the other interesting aspect of that is people talk about, public charging is too expensive. It's way too expensive. And I say, yeah, it is. But do you as an EV driver search for the cheapest places? And they kind of go, well, no, I go for the one that's more convenient. And it's interesting because if you look at Zapmap survey results, the top 3 most used charge point operators in the UK are BP Pulse, Instavolt, and GridServe. 3 of the most expensive charge point operators out there. So at the moment, people are very much favouring convenience over price. But obviously, as we go into mass adoption, that's going to change. But I think the target that everyone, the government needs to be focusing on is not necessarily what's the differential between home charging and public charging. It's, can we get public charging down to below the price of petrol or diesel? because that's kind of it's like a Rubicon. If we can get it down below that, and we can keep it down below that, that takes away a huge number of arguments that a lot of the people on the fence are going, well, if I'm charging in public, it's costing more than petrol and diesel. If we can remove that argument, I think it's going to be good for everybody.
Indeed, yeah. Yeah, and that's a really good way of looking at it. Yeah, a really good way of looking at it.
Talk to me a little bit about the ZEV mandate, the Zero Emission Vehicle mandate, because you and I were part of you were part of it, I was attending part of a discussion earlier on this week where you had a guest on, and for the life of me, I cannot remember his name, but he talked in detail about what the ZEV mandate is. And I know I learned a lot about that because my understanding of not necessarily the mandate, but the consultation around the mandate is very much focused on a different area to what I was aware of. Can you talk to that a little bit, please?
Yeah, so I think it's Andy Eastlake, who's one of our members, but he is a transport and energy engineer, and I think and James Vickery, who's sort of head of kind of the CO2 regulations in OZEV, was there as well. Yeah, so I think what Andy spelled out is that I think there's this misconception in the media that the ZEV mandate is all about reversing these targets. And some of that is driven by some of the discussions in the media before Christmas. But what the consultation has clearly said is we're not talking about changing the overarching targets of the ZEV mandate. There are sort of two points around that. One is we're talking about easing the cost of transition to the industry. So is there something we can do with the flexibilities that are in the first couple of years where auto manufacturers can trade between types of vehicle and types of credit? And then there's that question that between 2030 and 2035, so 2030 is when all fully kind of petrol and diesel cars are due to be phased out. So that's when you have 80% electrification on the road, but that still includes plug-in hybrids or hybrids. And that definition of what's still included from 2030 to 2035 when we are all fully electric. So all new cars have to be fully electric. So that 5-year period, what cars are to be included in that? And those are the two sort of the technical questions that are in the ZEV mandate. And then the part that we in EVA are focused on, there is a question in there around it's a demand. They call it demand side measures, but it's actually measures that ease the costs of transition to the consumer. And that is because at the moment manufacturers are providing those measures because the old plug-in car grant no longer exists. So they're discounting the cost of the cars, and the discussion in the press is that that's proving to be unaffordable, and obviously that's going to be the case for a couple of years. So is there anything more government can do to ease those costs? And that's about the consumer feeling able to afford the cars and then afford ownership of the car. So that's where we're going to focus in on, okay, well, what measures could we ask for that ease those costs? So the cost of purchase, so there are some taxation measures that we might look at, and some spend measures, but also the cost of ownership, which is the charging cost that we've discussed. Is there anything more that government can do to bring those costs of ownership down slightly for the consumer? And so those are the two areas that we're going to focus on as part of the ZEV mandate. And I say one last thing, it's quite rare for government to put these open questions into a consultation that's so far down the line, where you're talking about a specific instrument and you're in the middle of a policy that's been going on for decades, and you've taken away some of those demand measures because you thought the market was doing well. The market's not doing as well as you thought, so now you're having to rethink. And so it's quite a rare situation to be in, and a good opportunity for us to push some of the things that some of our members and other drivers out there that are really niggling at them when it comes to the costs.
Can we talk plug-in car grants? Because when I got my first EV 2018, OLEV at the time were giving, I think it was OLEV who were dealing with that.
Yeah, OLEV,
they were providing the plug-in car grant. Mm-hmm. When I came to my second one 3 years ago, that was no longer around. And I think it was Germany have stopped their plug-in car grant. And there was one other European country, it was either Italy or France, who did the same thing. And of course, they've seen the sales of electric vehicles, I won't say plummet, but they've dropped considerably as a result of that. Would reinstating a plug-in car grant be something that A, the government would consider, and B, EVA England would try and push for?
So I won't speak for government. I think that would be for them. So I mean, I'm not sure that it would be a priority measure to push for, because I'm not sure that government would respond to it. So the plug-in car grant in the UK, every time it got cut, and it was cut progressively over time, sales were not impacted. I think what really impacted sales in the UK was the rowing back, the rhetoric of rowing back from 2035 to 2030, because that's what really softened sales. And I think reading the government consultation, that's what they're trying to do, is to be really clear that the targets are set, that we have a stable investment piece, that consumers should go out and buy these cars. And I think that's what really made the difference here, rather than the cuts to the grant, although I'm sure there are many in the industry who would disagree with that view. So I personally think it's quite hard. The plug-in car grants, they are uncapped, so they're demand-led grants. So if you buy a car, you have to have one. It was never designed to be an ongoing sustainable sort of measure. It was always there to sort of kickstart the market, and it was around for a very long time. More tax measures are generally more sustainable. Now, obviously, we had a good tax measure in the form of vehicle excise duty, and government sort of judged that actually the tipping point and the fact that we're going to start to raise revenue from these cars is coming. But there are other taxation measures that we might look at. So, for example, in EVA, we'll look at the luxury car supplement, because there was a message in the autumn statement that said that they would be willing to look at the thresholds for that for EVs. So that's something that we will be wanting to discuss. And then ongoing discussions around reduction of VAT, which sort of comes up again and again as a couple of taxation measures. And then for us, actually, when we run our surveys, the two things that make the most difference to people when they're buying a car at the moment are salary sacrifice and the benefit in kind tax. So again, those are two really important measures that we will be pushing and making sure, can we push them harder? Is there anything more that we can do around those? And those are the things that we will be discussing with our members over the next couple of weeks.
Let me just push back on the vehicle excise duty. I did a whole episode on this last season, link in the show notes. But the issue, I don't have a problem paying vehicle excise duty. I've been driving for 2 odd years, and I paid VED every year apart from the last 6. So reinstating that, not an issue. My issue is, in year 2, I will be paying exactly the same as a V8 Range Rover that's getting 15 miles to the gallon. That doesn't seem right. Want to speak to that for a second for me, please?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. But so I sort of feel like so if I think about it, so I have some sympathy with the argument that, as you've said, road users need to pay their way. And I also have sympathy with the argument that it seems odd to do that at a time when sales have softened. So I think that sort of like-for-like comparison is coming at quite a difficult time. When reinstatement of vehicle excise duty, if that's what we want to call it, for electric cars was sort of first sort of signalled, the market was in a different place, and sales were booming, and they were going on a steeper trajectory than they are now. So I think, yes, it does seem the right thing to do, to have a look at that. But my reservation is that if the Treasury had to choose between one another, would they really take that seriously, or would they prefer to look at some of these other tax measures which might be able to kind of help kind of reset that balance over the next couple of years? And so I think from my point of view, we need, EVA is a small organisation. We need to try to focus in on where we think the door is slightly open and where we think we're going to have the most impact. And so whilst we will want to comment on vehicle excise duty, my gut is that we will have more impact if we do a bit more work and discussion around the kind of luxury car tax, benefit in kind, salary sacrifice, sort of how can we stretch those measures and, enter the conversation on that.
Okay, fair enough. Let's talk a little bit about EVA England itself. Now, one issue I know a lot of people have with EVA England is, because it's a membership organisation, what does membership get me? Now, I've had this conversation several times with Warren, the chairman, and James when he was in your role. Talk to me a little bit about why listeners should be looking to join EVA England and what the value is of that membership, please. So sort of the elevator pitch.
Yes, so I'd say there are 2 strands to membership with us, one of which I think is more valuable to our members in the few discussions I've had with them so far in the couple of weeks I've been in the job. So I think the more valuable one is that we have those links into government, we have the links into industry, we sit on several kind of policy level working groups with various others in the sector to try to really make a difference. And we bring the driver's voice to the table in all of those discussions. So we are the route into making change for drivers. So if you're a member of EVA, then we will be representing you in those conversations, and we'll be able to talk to you and make sure that we understand the experiences that you've had and make sure they are represented. And the second strand of our membership is obviously the deals that we have with some of our kind of formal partners, discounts for members, which we are in the process of kind of rejuvenating at the moment. So keep an eye on the website if you're interested in those deals. But I have to say, in the few discussions I've had, it's that former one, that kind of that ability to bring our voice into some really important conversations that are going on right now across government and the industry that's more valuable to our membership. And just being part of that drivers community, being able to connect with other drivers, to share experiences, having someone you can go to say, look, this isn't working for me. How do I get this done? We can also raise those concerns with MPs, especially if they're local issues in particular constituency areas, so that they can help us resolve some of those problems. So it's having that kind of community and that ability to seek help and get advice as well that I think is more valuable.
So what are you doing specifically to get that message out and to increase the membership of EVA England?
So, I mean, it's a really good question. It's one I'm sort of grappling with myself at the moment. So I think the first thing is trying to get the EVA England brand out there as a really good organisation to be a part of. So some of that is making use of our existing members. So obviously we're holding some membership events at the moment around the ZEV mandate, but we're also putting a call out for members who have expertise in particular areas to help us in certain projects. Also for those, as I say, when we go to meet with MPs, we'll ask members in those areas if they have anything we'd like to raise with them. So sort of trying to activate the current membership and get them excited about being a part of EVA and feeling part of that community, and like they can also help make that difference. And then so sort of using that to kind of increase our brand and increase our kind of credibility out there. And then I think we're also considering whether there are any kind of partnerships that we might do with people when it comes to, so we've also already got our kind of discounts, but is there anyone else who wants to be partner with us on particular pieces of work, or because they'd like to provide discounts to our members. So trying to kind of increase our brand recognition through that. And the other thing I think is just, as I say, getting our voice out there, just making sure that people understand who we are and what we do. We already have those good links into government and into industry, which will continue. But being seen to be doing stuff through those links will also help. So, for example, if we put a proposal in through the ZEV mandate consultation, if that work is taken forward, then obviously that's really great for us as an organisation that this recommendation that we have made is being done. So just showing people that, you know, this is what we're saying to government, and actually they are taking account of it, and we have made a difference here as well. So I think those are my sort of three prongs at the moment.
Fair enough. Let's talk a little bit about you as an individual. What do you say your strengths are? I mean, if I look at James, he was good at speaking to politicians, pushing a specific agenda. Warren, for example, very good at networking, building consensus. Where do you feel you sit in there? What are your strengths?
I think I'm very different to both of them, which I'm quite happy to admit. I say one is being a woman. I always say I've always felt it's always slightly harder when you're a woman to get your voice heard. But I think I would say I'm more of a thought leader, I think is how I would pitch myself in the corporate speech. So, you know, I've come out of government. I've been in government for nearly 20 years. I've led very large teams inside government and very large policy areas. So that ability to understand how to manage that world and to manage development of a policy and to think about how to have an impact is just a strength, simply partly because of how experienced I have been at it. And I think the other strength I have is the collaborative side. Like I'm always very keen to partner and collaborate with people and make sure that we jointly work on projects. A lot of organisations at the moment in the EV sector are similar to ours, quite tight on resource. You know, it's really helpful if we can lean on each other, if we can work together. If we're working towards the same outcome, joining forces is always a better way to make change than trying to work in your different silos and saying the same thing. So increasing our collaborations and partnerships is also another strength that I have.
Sort of pursuant to that, talk to me a little bit about what you're looking to do to work with some of the other electric vehicle associations across Great Britain. Now, I've come off a discussion this morning with Mark McCall from EVA Northern Ireland, and he was talking about some of the work that they're doing there. Are you looking at working with them, collaborating with them, for example?
I'd like to, definitely. So I think we're trying to get sort of all EVA call together to discuss our different work streams and how we can work together. I think the first point is obviously the ZEV mandate. Parts of the consultation are devolved and parts are kind of encompassing together. So we will work together on how we put together an outcome on that. And yes, as with all the other associations, I'm always very, very keen to work with other EV organisations. I'd say actually that I'm a member of the Women Drive Electric Facebook group, which is a really valuable source of information, and had a question on there the other day about a member who is based up in Scotland, didn't know about EVA Scotland. So there is a bit of kind of learning and knowledge sharing that we can all do across the sort of the 4 organisations about how we work best, 4 or 5 organisations, how we work best together to get our thoughts out there and make sure people know about us and what we do. So yes, very keen to work with them.
Big fan of George and Michelle from the
yes.
Women Drive Electric Facebook group. They're doing some fantastic work there. I think it's great.
They are.
One of my sort of big bugbears, I focus on 2 things on this podcast: education and trying to get rid of misinformation. I think misinformation is a huge issue when it comes to EVs. There simply isn't enough nationwide messaging to counter some of the tropes that all the anti-EV folks start spouting off. EVs spontaneously burst into flames. The batteries are so expensive to replace, and yet they're cheap enough to throw into landfill after 3 years. Talk to me a little bit about the EVA England approach to misinformation, how you're trying to deal with it.
At the moment, we're quite keen to get some blogs going on our website to try to unpick some of that and to bust some myths. So we've put one up. We've put a couple out recently. I wrote one on the ZEV mandate a long time ago when I was still a board director, trying to help people understand that this is what the ZEV mandate actually is, and this is the consultation isn't going to be about taking it away. We've done one on vehicle excise duty. So where there are particular announcements or particular measures or particular issues, then we try to put a blog up to try to clarify it for our members and the wider public. So we get a lot of traffic to the website from the wider driving community. And I think we are a helpful source of information and an independent source of information. So when people have a question, they come to us and they email in and they let us know, what's going on the network and some of the issues they're having, which is invaluable. And then we can put it on the list of things that we will need to do something about, just to clarify it for people. So obviously we've done the sort of taxation side. I think on our list at the moment are things around tyres, safety, signage, the consumer charge point regulations and what they actually mean for people. So we're stacking up quite a list of things people have come to us about. Insurance is on the list as well. So we've got a long list, and as I say, we've put a call out to our members at the town hall, and we'll revisit that for people who have expertise in particular areas and might like to help us kind of write some of these blogs, particularly if you work in insurance or you're an engineer, a vehicle engineer, or about the skills sector. So there's an awful lot we can do to draw members to make sure those blogs are really credible and really useful to people. I think the other thing we'd like to do is unpick some of the guidance that's out there. So I specifically am honing in on cross pavement at the moment because there is guidance on how to install a cross pavement solution, but it is really difficult to understand if you're a resident, if you're a driver. So I think if you're a local authority and a charge point provider, then you understand it and you've kind of worked in it and you've worked towards it. But actually, if you're a resident, trying to unpick your role in this and what you have to do is really, really difficult. So sort of putting out some explanatory sort of roadmaps and toolkits on how to work your way through some of these problems as a new driver is also on our list of things that we'd like to do. I'd say the list is quite long. I've sort of two and a half weeks into the job, so 3 weeks into the job. So whilst I have a really long wish list, we will try to roll it out as quickly as we can. But yes, I say to everyone I talk to, look, if you have an issue that you'd like us to dig into, that you'd like us to clarify, that you'd like us to explain, then come to us and let us know. So, the email address is on the website, kind of write into us and we can have a conversation about it, or we can provide some advice.
Of course, the irony is that list isn't going to get any shorter. It's going to keep getting longer and longer and longer. But exactly. That's the nature of the beast, isn't
Absolutely.
it? Absolutely. One of the things that EVA England produced last year was the EV Drivers Manifesto, which was meant as a way of helping with the new government that came in. I ran with everybody that I spoke to last season for the podcast. I asked the same question to them, and it kind of links in with the manifesto. And I want to ask you the same question now and see what your reply is. What is the one thing the new government could do to increase the uptake of electric vehicles in the UK?
Reduce the upfront cost of the vehicle somehow, which is based on our latest survey evidence, actually, from the flash survey that we've just run on the ZEV mandate.
That is fascinating because I had 15 or 20 people, 15 people, they all gave different answers. I grouped them together into different sectors. We had talks about infrastructure, talks about misinformation. Nobody mentioned anything about reducing the price of the actual cars themselves. It was interesting. It's the first time I've heard that, but okay, fair enough. Do you remember the old public service information? Charlie says, don't go away straight, click every trip and, all that sort of stuff. We need a government-funded public service announcement that covers a lot of these bits of misinformation so that people can look and go, oh, actually, I can do long distance journeys in an electric car. Oh, the batteries do last more than 3 years. Oh, they don't go into landfill when they've finished. Oh, the infrastructure is a lot better than people say it is. Something like that, I think, we need something that gets this out to a much bigger audience, like the old PSAs used to be.
I absolutely agree. Back in the days when I was head of OLEV, we had the Go Ultra Low campaign, which was really successful in doing that. But mostly that was about encouraging uptake and making people realise that these were normal cars and they worked for you. And we had a sort of a go-to one-stop shop website, which kind of all the latest kind of products were on, including energy tariffs, charge point providers, as well as the cars themselves. And then we also did paid for advertising. We ran TV ads, radio ads. But I think as time goes on, that gets less and less sustainable because there are, more than 100 products out there now and many more charge point products than there were back at the time. So, there has to be a consideration of what's a sustainable way to do that and to have that kind of trusted source of information. But I sort of feel like there's quite a few of us in the industry who can take that baton on. And, as you've said, we will produce blogs on kind of explanatory pieces of guidance on various issues where, perhaps it's not clear. The challenge is, how does that then get taken forward? Like, who goes and busts that out of the EV echo chamber that we all seem to be in? So I've long kind of worried that we all talk to each other and that we never seem to quite bust out into the sort of mainstream kind of consumer market. And how do we do that? And how do we make that jump? Because as you say, when it comes to clickbait, then some of the sort of main sort of papers, they're not going to focus in on the amazing things about EVs or do a particularly factual kind of recount of it. They're going to want to find the problems and where the story is, which is quite different. So that has always been a perpetual worry of mine, that we're all talking to each other all the time. And it's really hard to get out. And actually, when we did the survey for the ZEV mandate, we tried really hard to reach non-EV drivers. And I've always long felt that schools is the way to get that message out, because the school gate has a complete difference of opinion when it comes to electrification. And you have people who are really anti it through to people who are really pro. And just to try to break through some kind of forums where actually, it's not top of their priority list, so why would they be thinking about this? But to get to those people and to start talking to them, which is something that I think one of the things that we're considering with the EVA is whether we can do any sort of partnering around that with some of our members or partners who sort of have those relationships, which are slightly sort of wider and more outward facing.
I know we will have burst out of the EV bubble, the EV echo chamber, when there's a 30-second public service announcement in the middle advert of Coronation Street.
That's a very good barometer.
But that's going to cost a lot of money, I know from experience. Yeah. Right, I want to start wrapping up now. Is there anything that you want the listeners to know about either yourself or EVA England that we haven't specifically covered in our discussion?
It might be worth touching on who I am as a driver, which we sort of haven't put a bit of colour around it. So, obviously I live quite rurally, so I used to live in London, and we got our first EV, the i3, when we lived in London, and we did not have off-street parking, and we could never park outside our house. So cross pavement would not have worked for us. It was a bum fight to even get a parking space where we lived. So there would have had to have been a different solution for us. And we used to use destination charges at the time, which were quite adequate because when you live in London, you don't use your car that much. We moved out of London 6 years ago, obviously bought the i3 with us. And at that point, obviously needed 2 cars. And i3, we have one of the first generations, so it only has a 70-mile range. And I probably drive between 50 and 100 miles a day here, just on school runs and various other after-school activities, or if I have to just go down to the doctor's, it's a 10-minute drive. So vets is a 15-minute drive. So it's a lot of mileage that we stack up a day. So the i3 is great for one journey here, but we needed a second car because both of us were going to the station or places at different times. And so we got a Polestar 2, which is a very nice car and very different to the i3. What's really nice about having those 2 completely different cars is they are completely different. So if you want to do a short journey where you know the parking is going to be really tight, or you're going to have to turn in a really tight space, the i3 is brilliant and it charges very quickly because it has such a small battery. If you're going on a long journey and you're going on the big roads and you want sort of steady cruising, then the Polestar is great as well. But it's been a real test, I'd say, of the cars living out here. First of the charging infrastructure, because because we live rurally, it's just harder to get a charge point. And secondly, the road surface out here is difficult. So the roads are backcountry roads, they're potholey, they're muddy, tyre wear is interesting. So it's just been a real learning journey for us about these two types of car. But I think it brings like a massive wealth of experience to the role that I'm doing now, because I'm not speaking anymore just as a policy expert who lived in London and used her car, every so often, but we've really tested these two cars and we've really pushed them to their limits. And I think it really helps when you're thinking about the challenges that are coming in the sector, also what it's like to be a driver out there using these cars in the real world. So yeah, it's been really useful.
I love both those cars. Early on in this podcast, I took an i3, one of the, what did BMW call it? The 120 amp hour version. I did 1,000 kilometers in a single day in one of those with a friend of mine, the co-founder of the podcast. Absolutely fantastic. Enjoyed it. Really nice car to drive. As you say, a bit limited on the range, but that's what it was back in 2018.
Yeah.
And the good friends, the good people at Polestar lent me a Polestar 2 over Christmas for a couple of weeks. Absolutely love that vehicle. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Really nice car to drive. I think that's a very good place to bring it to an end. Vicky Edmonds, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Gary. It's been a pleasure.
Now, in this discussion, Vicky made two seemingly contradictory statements. And when I asked her about the plug-in car grant, she indicated this wasn't something EVA England would pursue, as the removal of the grant didn't make a difference to car sales in the UK. But when I later asked her about the one thing the government should do to increase the uptake of EVs in England, she said she'd like them to reduce the upfront cost of the vehicles somehow. Now, I asked Vicky about the apparent contradictions between these two statements. She said she certainly didn't mean to be contradictory. And there are two separate points that were linked. So, quote, the first is around timing. When plug-in car grant was cut in the UK, EV sales were forecasted to be higher, as the work on the ZEV mandate, the government's 2030 ambition, meant that there was a substantial amount of certainty in the market for both industry and consumers. And range anxiety was at that time perhaps the most significant barrier to consumer uptake of EVs. It was when the government rode back on the 2030 ambition to 2035 that substantial confusion was created in the market, and EV sales almost certainly softened as a result. Now, with that softer market and substantial consumer scepticism, upfront costs are presented a key barrier again, and there's no question that government should again consider incentives to ease that. However, she said, this leads to my second point, which is that both myself and others in the sector don't believe that reinstating the plug-in car grant is likely to be a preferred option for government. Looking again at taxation on the upfront costs of buying an EV, the luxury car supplement and VAT, are likely to be seen as more substantial in the longer term and have a better chance of getting somewhere in discussions around those. Close quotes. So to summarise, EVA England has been instrumental in helping push forward lots of things that have made the life of the EV owner better. They advocate for the EV driver and have helped push forward the EV manifesto to the government, as well as provide a lot of feedback concerning regulations such as the Public Charge Point Regulations 2023 and the ZEV mandate. But they can't continue to call themselves the voice of the EV driver if they don't have a membership that backs that up. So if you're listening to this in England and you're not an EVA England member, please follow the link in the show notes and sign up. It's a nominal membership amount per year, and it provides you discounts and offers with a number of partner companies. It's time for a cool EV or renewable thing for you listeners. Water wheels are making a comeback as a sustainable energy source in various places, including Kashmir and Northern Ireland. These machines can provide reliable zero-carbon electricity, helping communities become energy independent. Experts believe that using more water wheels could support efforts to decarbonise energy systems and improve resilience against power outages. Water wheels have been around for thousands of years. Formerly used to drive mechanical processes such as milling or hammering, they were a crucial component in the Industrial Revolution. And today, water wheels connect to generators and can produce zero-carbon electricity as they spin. Stick them on a river or a waterfall, and you've got pretty much 24/7 free energy, which is excellent. The EV Musings podcast is sponsored by Zapmap, the go-to app for EV drivers, helping you find and pay for public charging with confidence. Zapmap is free to download and use with subscription plans for enhanced features such as using Zapmap in-car on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, and discounted charging across thousands of charge points. If you're interested in the charging infrastructure for the UK, how the network of charge points is growing, and the decisions and factors that shape that growth, you might like to take a look at Zapmap's blog, The Charge. Every month or so, Melanie Shufflebotham and Jade Edwards at Zapmap take a whistle-stop tour of the latest public charging installation insights, focus on a specific charging topic, and highlight interesting charging news and foresights. It's available on the YouTube channel, Zapmap UK, and on the Zapmap LinkedIn page, and well worth a watch. I hope you enjoyed listening to today's show, and it was put together this week with the help of Vicky Edmonds. Thank you very much for your time, Vicky. If you have any thoughts, comments, criticisms, or other general messages to pass on to me, I can be reached at info@evmusings.com. I'm on the socials, on Blue Sky at evmusings.bsky.social. I'm also on Instagram at EV Musings, where I post short videos and podcast extracts regularly. Why not follow me there? Thanks to everyone who supports me through Patreon on the monthly basis and through coffee.com on an ad hoc one. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, why not buy me a coffee? Go to coffee.com/evmusings and you can do just that. ko-fi.com/evmusings. Takes Apple Pay too. Regular listeners will know about my 2 ebooks. So You've Gone Electric and So You've Gone Renewable. They're 99p each or equivalent, and you can get them on Amazon. Check out the links in the show notes for more information, as well as a link to my regular EV Musings newsletter and associated articles. Now, I know you're probably driving or walking or jogging now as you listen to this. If you can remember, and you enjoyed this episode, drop a review in iTunes, please. Really helps me out. Thanks. If you've reached this part of the podcast and are still listening, thank you. Why not let me know you've got to this point by messaging me at musingsev.bsky.social with the words, "The boss is back." Hashtag, if you know, nothing else. Thanks as always to my co-founder Simon. With the rise of fascism across the globe, the increasing strength of far-right organisations and the massive political upheavals that are currently going on, I wondered if Simon had any thoughts about how that will affect the rise of personal electric vehicles, such as his electric unicycle. And he told me he's content just to upgrade as necessary and spend his time at weekends putting in the miles. I asked him if he thought the Prime Minister should make it legal to ride these things on the road, and he told me,
I won't speak for government. I think that would be for them.
Thanks for listening. Bye.